Welcome, everybody. We're here for one more episode of MSP Confidential, and today with a very special guest, Kevin Lancaster of Channel Program. And we're coming to you live from ChannelCon in Atlanta, one of the big flagship events that CompTIA puts on every year. Kevin, good to have you, man. It's awesome.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad it worked out. You're out here on the East Coast, so it's good to do this in person.
Well, you get to some of the events and you come out to some of the things, but it's always good to connect in person. Yeah. I will admit, you had a bit of a busy schedule. We had to play a little bit of counter yo-yo yesterday, but it worked out.
I apologize. I felt bad because these events, it's just nonstop, morning to evening, and so I appreciate you dealing with my crazy schedule.
Well, dude, let's get right into it. I had all these interesting things to ask you about. First of which is IDAgent. You started IDAgent. Was that your first MSP sort of centric venture? Because you were kind of in the DoD side of things, defense contracting, that kind of stuff. How do you end up, building a product for MSPs out of, that?
Yeah, well, fundamentally, so Windvale was an MSP IT services provider. So we were providing all kinds of technologies, consulting services to public sector customers primarily. Then we had a commercial arm that did a lot of contract management and what have you. But it got to about 15 years into that business. We started reselling a lot of technologies, and we did a great job of finding emerging, bleeding edge technologies, and real proud of that. And we'd bring them into these agencies, and we'd win these great government contracts, and then we get a phone call the next day saying that, oh, we just got bought by Oracle, we just got bought by Symantec, we just got bought by this big organization. So we had it's like a hamster wheel. We're kind of going back to square one to find the next great technology. And I think it was right around 2015. I'd stumbled across a couple interesting capabilities based on one of the contracts that we had won. And I just had this light bulb moment that no one's really doing anything with this Tor data, this dark web data. And initially put it together to support one of our government customers. And we had a fair amount of success selling it to some local governments, largest sports leagues, largest law firms, some DoD customers. But then we pivoted. We looked at the MSP space at first. Didn't really know it was going to go anywhere, but it was one of those things where it took off. It was lightning in a bottle, and it was one heck of a ride with IDAgent.
Yeah, well, let me ask you about that too, because I remember when you guys were kind of hitting that viral expansion of IDAgent, and pretty much everybody was buying IDAgent at the time. What do you think was sort of this thing? It was just this, I guess it was just new and necessary, or what was sort of the trigger, I think, for MSPs to realize here's an opportunity?
Well, I think it was definitely new. It was mysterious. It was sexy. When you say dark web, so it was a great conversation starter. But I think it came along at a time, and unfortunately, MSPs still struggle to sell security, but it came along at a time where security is really starting to be a thing, right? You're hearing about all these data breaches. It was, you had to go beyond just selling a firewall, and there's that advent, really kind of that time where network monitoring was starting to really accelerate. But I think it came along at a time where MSPs were just struggling. They couldn't convey the value of these security tools to their customers. And so they're hitting their head against the wall saying, I've been trying to sell you these SOC services. I've been trying to sell you penetration testing, whatever. And along came, dark web ID, and we didn't initially, build it to be a, kind of a prospecting tool, but MSPs started to say, well, can I run a report, bring this to my customer, and show them why they need to be buying all the security tools I've been trying to sell them over the last couple of years. And so I think, it was, right market, right time. It was kind of a sexy product, but it really did have an impact on the MSP's ability to, have a conversation and sell more effectively. And I think that's why it took off, because I think the MSPs realized, I can take this report into my customer and show them I have these passwords that have been in 10 different data breaches, and have that conversation. So I think it just broke down the barrier, made it tangible for an MSP to go in and start selling.
I think tangible is a big piece of that too. Yeah. Like sometimes the whole IT thing is so abstract to the majority of customers, and I think a lot of MSPs fail to realize that early enough in their sort of trying to productize an offering or a price and package. But you talked about the struggle, and I think the struggle is an interesting piece as well. I feel like this comes up literally every week with every conversation, but the spectrum of size of MSP certainly kind of dictates a bit of the maturity in their operational model. But struggling around things like pitching a product or service seems to definitely be a function of size to some extent. Or have you found that smaller MSPs are doing this successfully?
I think the size, maturity, sales operations, that level of sophistication definitely helps. But then I gotta tell you, like there's some really aggressive, smart, savvy, smaller MSPs that just they figure it out pretty quick. And I think the common denominator often is the disposition of the background of the owner of the MSP, because you always hear, there's either a technical founder or a non-technical founder, and I shouldn't stereotype, but I think we see it more often. The real technical founder has a hard time, selling, right? They have a hard time, more introvert. I'm definitely stereotyping, but more introvert, and less comfortable having that kind of sales, almost conflict or confrontation type of conversation. And so I think the ones that are a little bit less technical, a little bit more kind of marketing focused, those the ones tend to be the ones that lean in and they scale pretty effectively. So yeah, I think in general we've kind of seen that, but we've seen some very small ones struggle, seen some very small ones accelerate, and see some large ones struggle. So I don't know. I don't know if there's a predictable model, but I think in general a lot of it goes back to the disposition of the leadership, and if their ability to sell and get out there and shake the trees.
Yeah, and I think most of these conversations always end up leading to execution. Seems to be sort of the defining factor of whatever size you are, whether you can achieve some of those things or not. But in the cybersecurity space, with the number of solutions that are coming onto the market pretty much every month, it seems like, do you think we've reached an inflection point where we'll start to see security being commoditized to any extent, or not yet, perhaps?
I think certain elements of security are already commoditized. I mean, take dark web ID for an example, right? I mean, when we started, dark web monitoring was brand new, was mysterious, it was amazing for us because we captured that wave velocity, but we picked our head up about 24 months in, 30 months in, and realized that everybody now has dark web monitoring integrated in some form or fashion into their products. And so I think there are some product categories that are highly commoditized, security awareness training, some others. I think there's still the ability to differentiate when it comes to the higher end security offerings, kind of the SOC and some of the XDR, MDR stuff. But it's a matter of time. I mean, with any of these product categories, you give enough time, enough entrance, enough velocity, people pick up on the success. You get upstarts coming in to try to take market share, and we do see that with this platform that we have now, the channel program platform. We've got now I think 1,000 vendors on the platform, and so we've got some stack charts so you can see visually how many vendors are in each product category. And some of the product categories you're overwhelmed by how many logos pop up on those charts. Yeah.
On the operational maturity model, I feel like there's also the sub maybe stream of security operational maturity model. And I remember Wes Spencer, Kyle Christensen, the guys at Empath now, talking about this interesting chart of like, if you're this size MSP, you shouldn't be doing SOC or SIM or SOAR or some of these other things. And so this is kind of where this conversation around the size of the business kind of starts to play a role, because, I guess maybe the data starts to show some interesting trends. Are you seeing smaller MSPs doing some of these things that are typically reserved for the larger, more operation mature MSPs that can actually, do a SOC, a SOAR type of service? Or are you just seeing more perhaps outsourcing of these services, a true partnership with vendors that are offering those things to them even at their smaller size?
Yeah, I think it's great question, because I think security has, security now is if you're not leading with security in a lot of aspects, then you're almost irrelevant, I think, when in some categories in the MSP space. And so I think there is that desire for some of these smaller MSPs to want to look bigger, want to sound more operationally mature, want to sound like they have that level of sophistication. But it's extremely hard, right? It's extremely hard to get to that place and run it effectively and scale a business because it's ridiculously expensive to scale an internal operations team or a SOC team, right? So yeah, I think you're seeing the rise of outsourced, options. Yeah, I think this is a pretty self-correcting industry. I think the MSPs that go out there and put themselves out there as something more that they are, I think they get corrected pretty quick by the customer
Or insurance.
or insurance.
Because liabilities,
Well,
I think, playing a role now
that's
too.
exactly, yeah, it was exactly what I was thinking because you can't over represent your ability internally, your ability to support your customer, especially now because of the insurance requirements, the compliance frameworks, and so I think I think we've kind of the industry, the general kind of market's maturing, and I think they have the ability to kind of call BS on what they're seeing coming from MSPs.
Do you think MSPs have what I would call maybe the patience to get good and grow to the level where they can operationally take on some of these functions? Because, I feel like there's a little bit of, let's call it stack parity FOMO to some extent. MSPs of all sizes are congregating at some of these events. They're talking to each other, and you see the 3-person shop talking to the 100-person shop, and their operational capabilities are wildly different. And sometimes you feel like you should be doing those things, and maybe you jump in too soon, and you're not ready, you fail. And obviously, the risk of putting customers in a bad situation, or even your own business in a bad situation, of course, plays a role. But what are your thoughts on sort of this stack parity idea?
Well, we see it. So one of the cool things about our platform, we've got this tool called Navistack, and it's free for every MSP. They can go in. What we wanted to do with that tool is finally give the MSP the ability to visualize their stack, right? So we started with the idea that there were roughly 29 core products that an MSP would buy to support their customers, but that turned into 72 core products and services.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you go on and you just look at the basic kind of Navistack framework, there's 72 different product categories or service categories, items or services that an MSP would buy to either deliver services to their customer or to deliver
administratively bill over line
internally.
Type of stuff.
But as we've had people or MSPs fill out their Navistack, we see there's a core group of 21 products that are represented across 83% of the
just by
stats.
category,
By category, right?
Yeah.
And then obviously there's different vendors and the composition of those, but there's 21 core product categories that an MSP basically uses in their technology stack. So yeah, there is a core stack parity challenge right now. You'll see, wild differences as the MSPs get bigger and what's in their stack. We've had one MSP in the platform. I think they had somewhere in the neighborhood of 160 products added to Navistack, and we said that's definitely an outlier. Let's see what's going on. So we called them and said, what's going on? And they said, we've acquired 3 MSPs. And we're actually putting stuff in to see how these other products are rated compared to the products that we're using today. But yeah, no, stack parity is a massive challenge, and I think the byproduct of that is service parity, right? You got that core stack, you got these core services, you got these things that you got market pressures, and you've got MSPs that want to represent themselves as bigger than what they are, but I think we're kind of entering this phase of stack parity, service parity, and now the MSPs really have to figure out how they're going to differentiate, right? And they have to do it in a way where they're not, to your point, going above their initial, capability set. They're not going out there and representing that they have these very sophisticated, high-end, security capabilities if they're, 4 or 5 person shop. But if they're going to go out there and compete, use this stack, one might use Kaseya, one might use ConnectWise. There's still parity. Their price points might, differ by $5 or $6, and at that point, it's like, how the hell do you sell? How you're really your value add, your differentiation, and it's a lot of what we're focused on and helping MSPs trying to figure that part out of it now that the data shows us that there is so much parity across this industry right now.
So, have a term that's thrown around in the industry a lot is vendor creep or vendor bloat to some extent, and I feel like, just the exercise of maybe documenting your current vendors makes you come into certain realizations. And I'm curious if you see a trend of MSPs, going in, documenting their entire stock, and then realizing, and then seeing a trend downwards in terms of number of vendors. That struck me as maybe an interesting data point.
Yeah, so that is again great thing. Not to make this a commercial about Navistack, but you go in and you start to enter the vendors or the products that you're using, and then you do see how much overlap you might have within your stack. And again, it could be it inherited. Maybe a customer, had another MSP selling this backup, and you inherited it, and maybe you want to migrate them off of them at some point. But to visually see the bloat, I think, is pretty incredible. So I think you kind of get really, right away when you look at a stack, you see two things. You see the bloat in product categories, but then you see the gaps in the product categories. And I think those are the two things that most MSPs kind of focus on when they get done that exercise of figuring it out. It's like, all right, now I've got three O365 backup vendors, right? But then I've got these 7 categories in cybersecurity we haven't even touched, right? And so I think it's helping them find a balance between how many vendors they have, and then where should they go as a business based on the gaps in their stack.
But come on, one of those products might have a better looking button to click on because, shiny object syndrome said nobody ever, right?
Oh yeah, it's one of the things that I try to coach the vendors when we do this. We do a monthly online event. We call it Engage, and I try to sit with the vendors and say, they don't care about the color of the button. They don't care about how great your people are. The MSPs want to know how they're going to make money, how they're become more efficient, how they're going to reduce technician, inefficiency. But when they get to an event, what do they see? They say, oh, that's cool. I like that interface. And they end up coming back from some of these events with like 3 or 4 additional products that they have to figure out and try to get somebody else to kind of stand up. So I don't think you're ever going to get away from that because that's the great part about this industry is that technology does evolve. People want to stay up. They want to be out in front. They're inquisitive, and so I think that's a great thing about the industry. But I think this tool has actually helped some MSPs kind of take pause of what they have inventory, and by inventory, even looking at like their contract start dates and end dates, right? That's another talk about operational immaturity or maturity. Most MSPs are still running their business on Excel spreadsheets, right? And so I think that's why we get such wow factor with this Navistack tools because first time they can visualize their stack and then they can start putting in, their contract start dates. They can do, maybe you have a contract that has a 60-day renewal clause. They put that in there. They get the reminder. And so hopefully we're having an impact on the number of, Reddit threads that are negative toward vendors, by MSPs being proactive about their stack and relationship with their vendors.
Yeah. Well, and I think in the land of commoditization, because we talked about that for a second, I think when all these MSPs start to have a lot of the same tools, I think the proposition to the market becomes very commoditized as well. IT services is kind of a requirement. We see more and more small businesses outsourcing their IT and depending on an MSP or some service provider to deliver that entire complex security suite of things, everything from obviously network and the hardware and the infrastructure to now security and compliance and stuff like that. But what are your thoughts a bit about this services, commoditization, but specifically the competition that's coming to MSPs as a result, and how can they differentiate?
Yeah, I think this is going to be, there are a couple of great trends in our industry, right? There's private equity coming in and really helping to mature, a ton of peer groups that have helped to mature MSPs, and they're becoming operational mature. So there's a lot of great trends in the marketplace. But one of the challenges is that it's a great marketplace, right? And that has attracted, in years past, I think the average is you see about 2,000 organic new MSP entrants into the industry. And I think last year, kind of estimated around 4,000, 4,500. So you're seeing kind of this rise in organic, so new upstarts coming up and creating, their MSP practice. But then now you're also starting to see, a lot of the groups that were up at that VAR, agent, reseller space, they're now coming into the MSP space. They do a great job of selling, hardware and routers and switches and telco, but they're realizing that the MSP marketplace, the MSP business model with recurring revenue is where they want to be. So I think you're going to see over the next couple of years this groundswell of new entrants coming up from the bottom, and then you're going to see all these other entrants coming down into this space, and that's going to put even more competitive pressure on the MSP to differentiate. And that's kind of some of the themes that we've been building our platform around. Is that how do you go into your customer and say, or prospect and say, all right, I'm keeping your email flowing, you're backed up and you're secure, right? And then they have a competitor come in and say, well, I can do your email and keep you backed up and secure for $5, cheaper. And so you're seeing a lot of that going on right now because there's increased competition. So our answer to that is that you got to get deeper with your customer, right? So our Navistack tool allows the MSP to go in, obviously, look at their stack, but then go to their customer and say, all right, here's what we're providing you. Now let's collaboratively look at your entire IT spend. So what are you using for your CRM? What are you using for project? What are you using for accounting? And they start to do that, and they start to see the entirety of the customer's technology spend. And I think MSPs have to get to that level with their customers. They have to differentiate. They have to make it a team sport, because this groundswell of others coming in and say, I can do it for, $1 cheaper, $5 cheaper, per, user per month. That's real. And it's been real, but it's getting accelerated for a number of reasons, right? The competitive pressures, but then that commoditization of these products is driving margins down as well. So you're getting pressure from both ends. You're getting the competitive pressure, and then you're getting the margin pressure. And if you're not in there with your customer, making this a team sport, understanding their technology spend, and then finding additional revenue opportunities, then you're gonna have a hard time keeping up for the next couple of years as it gets even more and more competitive.
So I think one of the challenges, you mentioned this commoditization and getting deeper in the knowledge of the customer tool set as well, and that visibility, and tools like Sasleo popped up. Aavik acquired them because it gets the MSPs a little bit of that visibility into that entire tool stack that the customer is using. That A, there's an opportunity for the MSP to manage, but B, creating potentially security situations, the whole shadow IT scenario. But I think all of that still kind of falls into this category of just infrastructure and tools. And that's not necessarily a strategic conversation other than, managing renewals or cost or IT budgeting. And it feels like there's still this other level that MSPs have to pull back on a bit to try and get into more strategic conversations. And I think, interestingly, compliance is driving a lot of that, because it's forcing MSPs to have conversations about risk, to have conversations about risk tolerance specifically, and getting the customers to get more involved in the conversation. I'm curious sort of what you're seeing from your vantage point, with this level of visibility into all the tool stacks that MSPs are using with compliance specifically.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And I think it's honestly, it's about time, because, it's funny, compliance probably popped up 10 years ago as a real thing around kind of NIST and what they were, Dr. Ross, what they were trying to do early days. And there's always this notion that you can be compliant but not secure, secure but not compliant, right? And it's taken the better part of the last 10 years to really get compliance to be a focus. Certainly, obviously, with regulated, but even some of the non-regulated industries now understanding that, they have to have some level of adherence or compliance, especially because cyber policies are now becoming, these insurance carriers are getting a heck of a lot smarter about what their risk tolerance is and what they want to underwrite. And so I think the smart MSP is messaging around that. I think the smart MSP is having those conversations with their customers. Is it gonna relate to the auto body shop down the street? Probably not, but you still have that pretty significant section of your customer base that compliance is going to become a even more of a hotter topic over the next couple of years, because it's taken a while. There's just so many different frameworks, so many different approaches. But I think it's now starting to become standardized that the MSP can use that as a lever and have more of a meaningful conversation with their customers. It's not just about the tool. It's about how the tool can impact the business, how it can mitigate risk, and what level of risk are you willing to accept, right?
It's become such a central conversation, and I see this popping up even in my live streams every week. I had a wonderful guest last week, a CIO in the enterprise who does fractional work, Chris Jensen, and he works with a lot of MSPs, and it's always interesting. He talked about this idea. One of his clients was switching MSPs, in fact, And he gave this example of, yeah, the new MSP came in, and without even knowing anything about the business, they're already quoting, oh, you need to replace all your switches, you need to replace your firewall. And it's kind of this idea of standardization is driving this kind of infrastructure life cycle before even a strategic conversation with the client. And I feel like you don't have to like throw that stuff in the garbage to start with necessarily, but it changes the dynamic. And what was interesting is the story he tells is the customer kind of came to him. He's like, what is this? Like, this is not how we work. Like, they don't know anything about our business. Why are we getting a quote to replace all our infrastructure here? Whether it's needed or not, I think it's neither here nor there, but I don't think necessarily, especially with the rising size of customers may not care about the MSP's standardization needs or their need to be operationally efficient. These things, they become much more detailed about what are the things that are impacting ultimately our costs and our ability to achieve our business outcomes, which is, again, the conversation MSPs are often not having soon enough. But,
yeah, it's got to be centered around business outcomes. It's got to be, again, going back to that our tool, like you have to have that 360-degree view of the business, not just their technology, but what are their motivations, what are their drivers. I think going in, and as I said, that one end of the marketplace, that just I want to sell you something, I want to replace this. I think those days are pretty much in the past, right? And I think the customers now are becoming more savvy and sophisticated. I think I don't know if it's a generational thing, or it's just a lot of the last 20 years technology has been forefront. Everyone's been they've been preached security and compliance, and so I think you have to have that broader business conversation before you go in and just start saying, all right, switch this out, do it our way. Right, and I think it's the customer pushing back and becoming a lot more sophisticated in what they're looking for in an MSP.
Yeah, in the category of maturing operations, which I think MSPs have been beat over the head about this for years. Push all your easy work to your lowest paid employees and get more efficient. I think there's a conversation that's kind of starting to rise, which is, well, we kind of need to also be mature enough to have business outcomes conversations with our customers, especially when the disparity of size increases. If you're a 30-person shop and talking to a 500-person end customer, they may not give you the time of day to believe or count your views for something. And so I think the knowledge of the people that are in front of the customer, the VCIOs or the account managers or even the technical owner, founder, perhaps doing some of this work, is just needing to change. But that's just one aspect, I guess, of operational maturation. But what are some of the other things you're seeing, aside from the usual, like obviously technician efficiency is a big deal, but where are some other operational efficiencies MSPs are starting to pivot on?
Well, I think you brought it up. I think it was part of it I think it relates back to the insurance, this whole insurance dynamic. I think there's rush to get your tool stack out there. Even if you see a lot of MSPs over the last 5, 6, 7 years, you get the insurance questionnaire, and it's like an exercise in just checking the box, right? And so I think there's maturity. That's almost forced maturity, and I think that's been a good thing about these peer groups, and they've been forcing maturity down the MSP's throats, and I think it's finally working. But I think that's another area that really helped to mature the conversation, is this whole it's the burden of risk. And I think MSPs that are starting to realize that they can't go in just one way, offering one kind of solution. They have to understand this holistic approach have to take this holistic approach with their customer, understand it, because ultimately they could be held liable for their representations of their services. So I think there's this. I think that's one of the drivers of maturity. I think interesting byproduct is that insurance conversation that MSPs start to have, and I think you're seeing a lot of groups start now coming into that insurance marketplace with better, more thought out insurance offerings, and I think that's forcing the MSPs to really kind of up their game around insurance as well.
Yeah, well, and I think part of the compliance and some of the efforts there, or getting deeper with the customer, involves getting deeper also with all the vendors that the customer is using, not necessarily things that the MSP is responsible for from a technology perspective, but simply helping them understand how all those processes and things that they do in the CRM that they buy online might affect how they interface with everything else they're doing. And so I think the vendor management piece is becoming more central to MSPs as well. And I think this is, you talked about Reddit, and so how vendors get flamed regularly for doing X, Y, or Z. But what are you seeing in terms of vendor management and maybe a maturation there?
Yeah. Well, what I'll say is that in the next couple of weeks, we'll have a really interesting addition to our platform to help in that whole vendor management, risk management kind of analysis, right? So MSPs have had to really think about risk, vendor risk management, because of the challenges. Not to pick on the RMMs, but the RMMs have obviously had some pretty significant challenges in the last couple of years. So MSPs get kind of that native vendor risk. Now the trick is, how do they take that down to their customer level and have their customers understand that they have that same level of risk within the other technologies that they're using. And so I think that's why it's important that the MSP goes in and not just says, all right, hey, I'm going to be responsible for this part of the sandbox, right? And then, you just do you. Here's all your tools. Because we all know that the door, or the way into these organizations, there's so many threat vectors, right? And there's so many that are outside the control of the MSP. But if the MSP doesn't have just basic visibility, then how can they even consider or contemplate defending against it, right? Or even having that conversation with their customers. So I think that the vendor risk management is going to be a big issue moving forward. One of the things we're going to do is we're going to tie in with all the CVEs, and so we'll help the MSPs and we'll help their customers understand, what are the potential alerts that are out there on the technologies that they're using. And so we have to, we want to help make this kind of a, again, a kind of a team sport between the customer and the MSP. They have to understand what are the potential threats coming up through their technologies. And that you're mentioning SaaSleo, and I know there's groups like SaaS Alerts where I think they did a great job over the last couple of years really surfacing that shadow IT concept to their customers. But now you have to take it a step further. Yeah, there's the shadow IT, and it might be legitimate technologies, but you have to have that situational awareness of what's going on with all these other third-party tools, whether you like it or not, because the threat vectors and the exploits are getting increasingly more sophisticated with AI. So if you're not thinking that way, you're not thinking about vendor risk management, then you gotta really check yourself.
Until you mentioned it a moment ago, I don't think I ever had a conversation with a customer about the inherent risk they have because of the tools we use. And I think most customers would not be savvy enough to even ask that one level deeper question about that. Nor are MSPs necessarily volunteering it. I think it's one of the things that maybe puts them in a negative light in the prospecting or talking to a potential customer situation. So that'll be interesting. I think whatever compliance maybe brings to the table there to drive a bit of those conversations. But in the compliance framework world, there's also the challenge, I think, that there's just so much to do from the customer's involvement perspective. And this is, again, one of those factors of size where if you're used to kind of just being delegated the questionnaire and just ticking off the boxes, yeah, you're doing that, we're handling this, et cetera, and giving them back, I think where the customer now needs to be compliant, maybe there's not the opportunity to be so nonchalant about it. Now you have to get them to actually stand up a security committee. They have to sort of care about their own rescue, just so to speak. And I think that'll be an evolving thing. It's not an overnight thing. And then legislation is not really kind of hitting anybody just yet. There are some requirements, guidelines, but perhaps nobody's required by law, and certainly no framework of compliance or certification for MSPs to even be in business. And so it's interesting. I see the industry maybe asking the MSPs themselves, saying, we'd like to have more stringent controls over who can become an MSP, because I think it affects the industry as a whole when, somebody that's poorly protected has a situation.
Yeah, no, I think there are challenges. There's it can be a slippery slope when you try to, create standardization. What is an MSP? Are you really qualified to be an MSP? That's going to be interesting to see, play out. But look, I think it will follow that kind of same process that a lot of these compliance frameworks that popped up 10 years ago, followed, right? They were brought out as guidelines. They were enforced in, healthcare and government and legal, and and they are, that's the lay of the land, it's the law of the land in those industries. but I think it's inevitable. It's a matter of time that it's going to, it's, again, might not go down to the auto body shop, but the auto body shop, they do have PII in a lot of times, right? They've got, customer data, they got,
Of course.
they got, credit card data, what have you. So I think it will take a while, but I think you'll start to see, there'll be that forced, forced compliance. It's I think it's just inevitable,
Yeah.
for better or worse.
As a result of I guess, mapping the stack, mapping the services that you offer to customers, there's maybe the realization that you could be doing more. Because I guess part of it is, the benchmarking. And I think this is a popular thing with MSPs. They like to compare notes, obviously. And when they hear that somebody's offering a service a certain way, it's like they go and kind of blow everything up and then start from scratch, and they kind of are constantly in this reinvention mode, I suppose.
Yeah.
But that kind of also comes with broadening a bit of the amount or types of services that they're delivering to customers. And I'm curious if this comes up in your data somehow. They're doing more things across more areas for more customers.
They definitely are. You're seeing that, again, that goes back to the stacked sprawl. We're going to have a really interesting report come out in October. Actually, in fact, going back to last October, we did this kind of first, what we call channel map. You can visualize, at that point, I think we had something like 600 odd vendors in there. This one will have close to 1,000 vendors. And so I think last year was 600 vendors and maybe 700 plus products, but this one will have close to 1,000, maybe 1,600, 1,700 products. And so you think about not just from a competitive standpoint, but then the sprawl, how many new different technologies are coming out. And so that's been interesting to see, and you do see with some of the larger organizations, there's that wanting to kind of explore these different areas because they might be at size and substance where they can kind of do that. But I think, it's still, some of the smaller organizations are going to have a harder time because of technologies evolving so fast, the threats are evolving so fast. But I think this report would be really eye-opening because we now have the ability to catalog the velocity of product categories. So what product categories were strong last year? Which ones are strong this year? How do they compare? We can benchmark the velocity of vendors in each category. And then we can also take the product reviews that we have and we can look at how the MSPs scored those products. So what started last year as a one-page, massive, visualization of 600 vendors is now going to be, I think,
an even massive.
Yeah, it's like, I think we're at like 55 pages now, the way we've kind of broken it down. And so we've got that coming out, and then we'll have a really interesting cybersecurity specific report coming out at the end of the year. So
you'll have to go to 11 by 17 format.
I think Nick put it, Nick, who's working on the data with us, if you actually printed it out, I think it's like 3 stories of logos. I mean, it's just crazy how massive it is. But nevertheless, though, the data that we're able to publish now, I think will tremendously help MSPs make decisions moving forward on what should be in their stack, what their stack looks like compared to their peers. And that's what you want, right? You want people to understand, where they are, and you want to understand kind of how others are using technologies and improving their business. And so that was the premise behind this platform, is just try to be as transparent as possible with the data to help make MSPs, help them make better decisions.
Well, I expect to see during the marketing launch of that now a 3-story long continuous form of logos being dropped from a 3rd story, because now you've put that in my head.
That's one way to go viral, I guess, huh? Yeah.
But you talked about velocity, and I think this is an interesting one for MSPs as well, because with all the activity going on in M&A, for example, I think there's like a gold rush to sort of be sellable.
Yeah.
And then there's the flip side of that. A lot of MSPs are like, I'm not in this to sell. I just want to do my thing. And there's the so-called lifestyle MSPs that are just kind of coasting, or they're growing organically perhaps, but not chasing necessarily a sale. But I think there's definitely sort of this urgency that seems to be happening around, getting your business in a state that's ready for sale, doing the right things, the stuff that the PE firms are recommending, or even those roll-up MSPs are recommending. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think private equity coming into this marketplace, over the last 5, 6, 7 years is fantastic in that it really validated this market, right? And then I think it's a testament to, as I mentioned earlier, all these peer groups, all these organizations that have been pushing the MSPs to mature. And so, during, we had this massive spike of business in this industry. It really showed how important MSPs were during that pandemic, and then obviously validated the marketplace. Private equity comes in and it's done great things and from these roll-ups. I think one of the challenges it is going to present though is that there's we already have a scarcity or lack of talent, right? And MSPs, we've talked earlier about you've got pricing pressure, you got commoditization, you got eroding margins, you got increased competitors coming in. I think one of the things that's another area to be thinking about is this challenge of labor shortage, right? And the talent crunch. And automation is going to help, AI is going to help, but it's not going to save the MSP, right? They're still going to have to get out there and differentiate and have those conversations. So it'll be really interesting to see how this plays out. I think again, private equity has been great. It's validating, but I think there's kind of a negative impact of this push for private equity and the roll-ups. In general, I think it's good for the industry because it's maturing and it's validating, but I think it's really going to highlight the resource, or lack of resource that we have from a talent perspective over the next 5 or 6, 7 years.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, Kevin, man, it's been interesting to get an insider look to some of these thoughts and things you have with so much data coming at you. And congratulations, of course, on Channel Program. SkillPad has been privileged to be part of that, and we see a lot of engagement from MSPs that are on Channel Program. So thank you for that. And thank you for coming on and sitting down with me for a few minutes and having a conversation.
Oh, are you kidding me? Anytime I can hang out with you and you're in town, my goodness, absolutely.
Right on. Well,
Yeah.
Good to see you again. Folks, thank you so much for joining us. We are every Friday at MSP Confidential at 12 Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. You can find us at mspconfidential.com. We hope to see